to welcome everybody to the first day of our mission here at St. Louis for the season of Lent. I'm honored to introduce our speaker for the night, who is Father Dennis Robinson, who of the Order of St. Benedict, who is the President Rector of St. Meinrad Seminary in Southern Indiana. We currently, I think, have 3 seminarians there. 2, I'm sorry. We're doing better next year. So anyway, but Father Dennis and I were ordained together for the Diocese of Memphis in 1993, on June 12, 1993. And in 96, and he was assigned to the cathedral from 93 to 96, and then returned to St. Meinrad to become a monk there at the Arch Abbey. And while he is there, he has received his doctorate degree, 2 of them, isn't it? Yes. And one in systematic theology, correct? And the other one in philosophy or history? Philosophy. And so, and then he became president rector of the seminary, succeeding Father Mark O'Keefe. And so the seminary at St. Meinrad, probably one of the best seminary in the United States. And I'm glad that we are back at St. Meinrad with regard to our priests. I would say about 30 to 35% of our priests here in Memphis are alums of St. Meinrad. And so, again, welcome, Father Dennis, to St. Louis for these next 2 evenings.
Hold off on that business till you hear what you're going to hear. Lord have mercy. Okay. Well, thank you, Father Keith, for that nice introduction. Father Keith and I have known each other for a long time, and I won't tell if you won't tell. I'll just say that. So. We'll be fine. I'm glad to be with you this evening. I'm glad to have this opportunity. I tell you, I'm surprised to see so many people here, because last night, at noon today, it was packed over there, but they had food. You're here with no food. It's unheard of in the South. You must have food. Everything has some food connection. But thank you for being here this evening, and I'm very, very happy to be with you. I was told just before before the conference this evening, that I would be speaking to the children tomorrow. The children. I can't wait. I said I do very well with grades like 1 to 4. From 4th grade to like graduate school, not so much. And then graduate school could be a little iffy at times too, I'll tell you. But I say, everyone said, when I was at the cathedral back in the day, they said, you'll be doing, just a little bit of conversation at the girls' high school. And it says, girls are a little bit dramatic. Let me tell you, no. Nobody is as dramatic as a seminarian. Oh my gosh. The things that they're overwhelmed all the time. It's the most emotional moment. It's just terrible. Their golf swing is off, it's just, anyway. I've become very accustomed through the years of listening to the most tragic stories with a completely straight face. So, there we are. But I am glad to be with you this evening, and glad to have the opportunity to share just a few reflections on the scriptures. And as you noticed in the wonderful posters, which by the way have a very slim picture of me, in which I'm very happy. Today you'd need a double wide poster probably to get me on it. But the poster gave the title, and you might have been a little confused by the title that I offered for these reflections, which was, Dear God, Are You There? And it's a question. And I'll tell you that it's not a question that I came up with. It's a question that was given to me by one of our alumni who is a pastor in Indiana. And he thought that at the kind of Christmas season, like of the end of the COVID, so you remember the COVID kind of started in March, everybody went crazy, and then by the time we got to the end of the year, some things had settled down, but a lot of things had also happened. And he thought it would be a great idea for his students in his school to write letters to God. I think that's crazy, but he doesn't like Santa Claus. And so, instead of writing a letter to Santa and asking for what you want, he thought, well, we'll have them write letters to God. And so Santa Claus missed out on letters that particular year. I know how to do things and know what to say, what I'm not supposed to say. Anyway, Santa Claus. Anyway, so he started this thing of having them write letters to God. This was a bad idea because you have to deal with the emotional things, right, that are going to come from this. And so he was sharing with me one of the letters that had been written by a little 3-year-old girl. And it was simply that one line, Dear God, are you there? Now, when you think about it, that's quite a profound question for a child of that age to ask. But it's also a question when you see that written down on a piece of paper in that childish scrawl that only, third graders have. So this is 8 years old, third grade. You have to ask yourself, how did we get to that? What had she experienced in that very dramatic year that had led her to ask that question? And I can understand the question. And I don't know that it's not a question that a lot of us ask as well, or have been asking, or at least thinking about, or at least lurking there in the back of our minds, that we may not want to give articulation to it or say anything, but we have to be asking ourselves, God, are you there? And in looking back over the past couple of years now, we have to admit that COVID has taken its toll. And I don't mean that just in terms of physical things. We know that. But I really mean that, when you look at the losses that people have had. For example, I had a classmate, Father Keith and I have had a classmate, and his mother had to witness within a week the death of his father and the priest's death. They died within a week of each other, both of COVID. I have a seminarian who came to St. Meinrad just this January, just this past. He was one of those strange mid-level transfers. He came to St. Meinrad in January. In the first 2 weeks of his being there, 3 of his grandparents died of COVID. And he had to go back and forth to his home in Oklahoma. And we all maybe have that story of when it started, we were like, I don't know, I don't understand any of this. We didn't have a single case at St. Meinrad for almost a year. And then it just hit. And many of us might have been at least at the beginning in this situation where we were like, oh, I don't know anybody, or I don't know what's, and then one by one, some of these cases begin to unfold. And even if COVID has not affected us in that kind of large way, in so many ways, I think in small ways it has affected us, whether that is isolation, or not being able to, be with family members. I was with a couple not too long ago, and I was at their home in Bloomington, and they said they had not been with their family for now going on 3 years, and it was devastating. Just because as you become older, that kind of connection becomes very crucial, but they hadn't been able to be together for that period of time. There are smaller ways, that we can see also that this has begun to affect us. So COVID has taken its toll, but that's not the only story, is it? That's not the only story that we're encountering. And I was thinking, in so many ways, when you look at the way COVID has overwhelmed our news cycle over the past few years, it's also amazing now that we're beginning to see other things begin to emerge. Ukraine, for example. I mean, how do we even begin to think about that? The world has become such a small place, and so many of us know people who actually are either directly or very indirectly or slightly indirectly involved in that scenario. For example, we have a seminarian at St. Meinrad who is from Poland, and his family lives like 5 miles from the Ukrainian border. And they have had to rethink their whole world based upon this influx of refugees coming across the border into Poland. And he got this idea, and this story just overwhelms me. He got this idea that he wanted to do something and get his fellow seminarians at St. Meinrad involved. And so he decided, he found a place in Ukraine, a Benedictine monastery that was taking in refugees. And he said, I want to do something. I want to get some money to these people to help them. And so he decided to collect money from his fellow seminarians. Now, this sounds like a heartwarming idea. This is not a good idea. First of all, seminarians are very poor, and they will tell you exactly how poor they are. And their dioceses never give them enough money, and they never have enough. They're constantly, it's just a constantly complaining, I don't have any money. Don't you want to go out to eat? I don't have any money. How much, do you have any money? No, I don't have any money. We started this collection 2 weeks ago, and this morning I heard that they've already collected $12,000. They're not going out to eat for a while. That's a sacrifice. That's a sacrifice. And it'll go higher. It'll go higher. I know it will. I've just invited our overseers to contribute to this fund, and so we'll see it go higher. But what a sense of accomplishment they have. Our world has so much suffering. And I go back now, we can look even within the church. The abuse crisis continues to unfold. We don't know how. We don't know how it unfolds. We don't know how new things keep coming to light. We don't know how new stories keep emerging when we have been living now for almost 40 years with the abuse crisis. How does that continue to happen? When I first became rector 15 years ago, we have a very kind of firm idea about how we want to talk about these things very honestly and very bluntly with seminarians. And I said, I remember saying this in a conference to seminarians 15 years ago. I said, I think we can safely say that the abuse crisis we are experiencing in the church comes from bad decisions made in the past. But I don't know that that's true anymore. The cases continue to emerge, and they continue to emerge among younger people. And bishops continue to make mistakes, and then they continue to backtrack on things that they've been doing. You look at these things and you think, how is this possible even now in these days? Or another thing that I think is so major, there was a study done just a few years ago, very important study on the patterns of religious engagement in different age groups. And the one thing that they noted, and I think it was true, is like a couple of generations ago, and I won't say who was in those generations, everybody in this room probably, there was a pattern that was like when you went to college or you went, got graduated from high school, you went to college, you sowed your wild oats a little bit. Church might not have been the most important thing in the world, you know what I'm saying? And then, you started a family, got married, started a family, and go back to church and then kind of stay. And what this interesting study that was done kind of showed was that now most young people are not they're leaving just as we did, or maybe you did. I never left, look at me. We, like many of us did, but they're not coming back. They don't see the importance always of coming back to church. Not all of them, certainly, but many of them. And I know the things I hear from talking to people are, my kids don't go to church anymore, or my grandchildren don't go to church. And they don't even think that it's an important thing for them. And that's heartbreaking, especially when parents have devoted so much time, so much energy, so much money in educating their children, sending them to Catholic schools, trying to give the best example they could, and not successful, or at least that's what we think. I don't know, there might be some more to that story. Faith is not strong. Faith is not strong among so many people today. It's not the top thing that we're thinking about, most of us. Even those of us who continue to go to church, continue to be involved in parish activities, continue to come and listen to insanely boring speakers speak at 7 o'clock on a Monday evening. Even those of us who are here. Are there other things that kind of take up our time? Are there other things that we might prioritize in a different way? I don't know. Parents, grandparents, it's not even a child's question anymore, I don't believe. That many of us, in light of all the things and so many more, in light of all of these things, might be asking in the back of our heads, even if we can't articulate it, might be asking in the back of our heads, dear God, are you there? And sometimes it's a question we don't want to know the answer to for one reason or another, or think we don't. This weekend, if you were here, and if you were and had to hear me preach, I'm sorry. Bad news. If you were here, though, I spoke a little bit about what I call the importance of realizing our strengths and our weaknesses. So when we look at our life of faith, when we look at the things that we do, when we look at our larger kind of sphere of life, when we look at our careers, we look at our families, when we look about our civic involvement, we like to focus on the strengths. We like to identify ourselves according to the strengths. We like to be a success story. And maybe we are. I hope we are. We surely are. And those become the things that we like to present to God in kind of that personal spirituality. We want to tell God that we're really doing well. But so often, and I think this is an important thing for us to remember, God doesn't always work through our strengths. God is much more interested in working through our weakness and through our vulnerability. And I say this, as I said this weekend, I say this to the seminarians all the time. I said, you're going to constantly tell me about your strengths, and boy, they do. They're very prayerful people. They said the chaplet of St. Dymphana 1,900 times a day. And since she's the patroness against mental illness, I think that's appropriate. They say the rosary, they say the prayers, they go through the breviary, they go through their, everything. They have all of these things. I said, and maybe they're trying to impress God. They certainly are probably trying to impress me, and I don't care. And God wanes. But I wonder, and I say this to them all the time, I wonder if your real connection, not only to God, but also to the people that you'll be serving in parishes like this one, in parishes across the country, I wonder if your real strength is going to be your ability to be vulnerable and your ability to say to people in the parish, I don't have all the answers, and I hurt sometimes too. I always give them this example, and I think it's a good example. I know that it's a good example because I give it. I always give this example of I said, when you're a priest, in the future, you're going to be called to an emergency situation in the hospital, and you're going to get there, and it's going to be crazy, because that's how hospitals generally operate, and it's going to be the emergency room, and someone has had an accident, and they may not be people you know particularly well, but you got called because you live closest to the hospital, and you're going to get to the hospital in your little oils, and you're ready to go, and you're like going in, and you're ready to make that moment, and the woman whose husband has been in a terrible accident is going to come up to you. I said, I know this happens all the time, is going to come up to you and is going to say, Father, why did God let this happen to my husband or my son or whoever? And I said, the worst answer that you can give at that moment is any answer. You have to say, I don't know. Do you know, I don't know, 3 words, I don't know is the hardest 3 words in the masculine language. Men like to have a little control over things, I don't know if you know that, but it's true. It's very hard for us to say, I don't know. And I say this to the seminarians. I said, but most of the time as future priests, people are going to have questions that you're going to have to say, I don't know. But the key to success is not giving them an answer, because they're like, oh, well, maybe we could tell them that your husband was in a terrible accident because of canon law 514, which said, not the answer, not at all. The answer is I don't know, but here's the key. Let me sit with you, and let's pray together, and let me hold your hand. Please, God, don't make me wear that stupid mask, and let me hold your hand. And I'm going to sit here for 2 hours with you, and we're just going to let you talk, and I'm not going to say much, and we're going to pray, and I'm going to hold your hand. That's the answer. That's the answer. But that's very vulnerable. That leaves us in a very vulnerable place. How many of us, those of you who have families, have had teenage children that are terrorists, because that's the nature of the teenage mind, to engage in domestic terrorism and to torture their parents. Y'all right there, Barbara? All right. To torture their parents. And yet you just have to say, okay. I was just reading a novel about parents and teenagers, and it was all about how the parents kept rising to the occasion of the child, trying to torment them. And then they got some good advice from somebody, because they always do, not a priest, it wasn't me, and said, just let it go, let it go, let it go, let it. We have a hard time doing that. So much of our strength is going to come from our ability to be vulnerable. And so I want to focus just a little bit this evening on a passage from St. Luke's Gospel. Dear God, are you there? The passage comes in chapter 10, verses 25 to 37. And it is by far, one of the most familiar stories in all of the Gospels. And St. Luke has a way of telling a story that is going to cause quite a bit. Oh, look, there's a puppy. Who is this puppy? She's a sweetheart. Look at her. God bless her. You just don't always see a puppy in church. See a few monsignors who are old dogs, but you don't see young puppies. That's the way it works. Or vicars general. I don't know. But the story comes in a very critical moment in St. Luke's Gospel in chapter 10, which is St. Luke's Gospel is the unique gospel among the four in the New Testament, because it tells the story of Jesus, and more the story of discipleship, from the point of view of the Gentiles rather than the Jews. In other words, Luke was a Gentile. He was one of St. Paul's followers, and he was a Gentile, and he later was with Paul in the Acts of the Apostles. But St. Luke is a Gentile, and he is interested in the Gentile way of looking at the story of Jesus. And so it's very interesting, because at the beginning of the Gospel, beginning with chapter 3 down through the end of chapter 9, did you hear that? 9. That was Memphis coming back. It doesn't take long, does it? It's back in chapter 9. So 3 to 9. I say Memphis is great because it's the only place where the word "theus" can have 4 syllables. In chapter 9, so Luke works that whole kind of from chapter 3 to chapter 9 of Jesus going continually to the Jewish audiences, and he fails miserably. They don't believe. They try to throw him out of the synagogue in Nazareth. It's just a bad scenario. And then, right at the end, in chapter 9, he picks up 70 Gentile followers. And this is like, whoa, we just usually think of Jesus as, sitting around the campfire with the 12 and maybe Mary Magdalene, But he's got 80 or so followers now. And most of them are Gentiles. And he's going, there it is. And he's going to spend time with these people. And we hear in chapter 9, verse 52, Jesus sets his face to go to Jerusalem. So he spends that time from 9:52 until chapter 19 getting to Jerusalem. And it's during this time that he explains what discipleship means to these Gentiles. And that's a very important development, because it's going to give us insight. And Luke is a great storyteller. That's what my mother used to say about me when I was a kid. You're a real storyteller. She didn't mean it in the same way, though. But Luke is offering us then this kind of what is often referred to as the catechism of discipleship from the end of chapter 9 until chapter 19. And the first lesson that he wants to teach is this story from chapter 10, the story of the Good Samaritan. Now, it's a very important story, but it's one that we frequently miss. We don't get it. And probably because it's just so familiar to us. We know the story of the Good Samaritan. And all we have to hear when the reading is proclaimed, if we're not back in the back writing out the check, what we have to hear is a man was going from Jerusalem to Jericho. And it's like, click, we know that. It's done. But the story has so much in it, and so much that, and here's the thing, we don't always get. To Jesus' original hearers, this was very shocking, even scandalous. And we don't get that because it's all like, oh, you know. So I was thinking, you know, one of the things I do whenever I talk about this, I say, you know, we are familiar with the preaching of this particular parable in this way. And I invoke now the spirit of Monsignor Clunan. This seems the right place for that. I don't know. Did anybody ever know Clunan? Are you all too young? 3 of you knew Clunan. You know, I would say this is Clunan preaching on the Good Samaritan. So he gets up to the pulpit. All right, okay. Today we have a story, the Good Samaritan here. Good Samaritan, we know all about it, right? You know, it's a story of a man who walking down the street and gets mugged and is in a ditch. The old man in a ditch. And, you know, it's about this priest and Levitt. They come by, you know, and they walk by him and they don't do anything because they're mean, and they don't give him nothing. And then the Samaritan comes by and he's a good man. Good man. He goes and picks the man up, takes care of him. He's all good. Now he said, you know what? Here's the thing. You don't want to be like that priest or that Levitt. You want to be like that Good Samaritan and help somebody. Help your neighbor. That's what you want to do. Be good to your neighbor and help your neighbor. Okay, we're going to have bingo here on Thursday. Short but sweet. But that really kind of summarizes our thinking about the Good Samaritan, because we hear that parable and we think it's a parable about being nice to people. You know, don't be a priest or a Levite, you know, but be a Samaritan. And we have Good Samaritan as an ideal. We have Good Samaritan laws, all of that, and Good Samaritan. And so who are you in the story? That's the real question of any homily, right? Who are you in the story? And we want to say you may be the priest, you may be the Levite, but you certainly want to be the Good Samaritan. Wrong. It's all wrong. You know, and I think that's wonderful. You know, we have to learn every once in a while that we've been doing something wrong our whole life, and that's it. The Good Samaritan is a very complicated little story because, and again, we miss pieces of it because we're not exactly in the context in which St. Luke was originally having Jesus tell this story. So a man was going from Jerusalem to Jericho, and the thing we need to know about it is that the first thing that would have come into the mind of people in that time was that's a dangerous road and bad things happen to people. And so it's kind of almost a comic image that Jesus is throwing out there of the man going from Jerusalem to Jericho. It's kind of like a guy that went to an ATM machine, got all of his cash out, taped it to his body, and walked through Orange Mound at night. Think about it. It's not going to end well. It's not going, it probably, maybe it will, but I doubt it. And so we're not surprised when this man ends up in a ditch. And I frequently refer to him as, we don't know his name, but I call him Jid. Jew in ditch. J-I-D. There he is. There in the ditch. And you know, he's having a bad time. He's having a bad time. You know, and this is what Luke tells us. A priest goes by. And the man sees the priest, and do you know what he thought at that moment? He thought, forget it. Nothing's going to happen there. Now, that priest's probably day off. You know, he's probably going to play the golf, you know. Or, that's not true. That's not, he knew that priest wouldn't help him because the priest was going to Jerusalem. And he couldn't defile himself by touching blood because he only went to Jerusalem twice a year. The same with the Levite who's serving in the temple. He couldn't touch him. So it wasn't that they were indifferent or mean. It was just that the law, the Jewish law, prohibited them from engaging with the man in the ditch, old Jid. Then a Samaritan comes by, and we think, oh, this is nice, a good Samaritan. Oh, they're so sweet. Those Samaritans. You know, this is the thing. Jews hated Samaritans. And I have no doubt in my mind that when Jid saw that the man coming down into the ditch was a Samaritan, you know what he thought? He thought, please don't let that filthy thing touch me, and I'd rather die in this ditch than be dealt with by the Samaritan. Is it true that these lights don't come from the outside, that this is all fake in the back? I love that. I am definitely getting one of those. I'm easily distracted. I have very short attention span. So, but it's the man that he didn't want to help him, the man he hated, who picks him up and puts him on his beast and pours oil in his wounds and takes him to an inn and says to the innkeeper, hold on to this and help him and take care of him, and here's the money, but if you have more money that you're going to spend, just I'll give it back to you. Way past what is needed. But it was the Samaritan who helped him. You know, and it's very interesting, that image of the inn, katalima in Greek. The inn comes at that midpoint in the gospel with the Good Samaritan. But remember, at the beginning of the gospel in chapter 2, there was also an inn. Mary and Joseph go to the inn, and they say, we have no room for you here. It's almost like the inn of Judaism could not receive Jesus, even in potentia. But here in the middle, the inn takes the man and cares for him. And so when we come down to this story, it's very tempting for us to want to say, oh yes, we can be just like the priest, or we can be like the Levite, or we can be like the Good Samaritan. And there are times in our life when we certainly are. But there is only one character in the gospel that we are always going to be, and that is the Jew in the ditch. And we know that. We know that. You know, let's be honest. How many of us, even tonight, even in these rarefied environment, even in Memphis, where you can smell the wafting barbecue coming off of Poplar Avenue here, it's paradise, right? Even here in this paradise, aren't we concerned about things right now? You know, we're wounded people. We're hurt people. We have things we're holding on to. You know, let's be honest. None of us have perfect families. And we may have those children that can't seem to get themselves aligned, or can't seem to get their family life aligned, or have been through 4 or 5 marriages already, and the one to whom you're married now is not your husband. You know, we have family life. If we're honest, we know what those weaknesses are, and we know our own weaknesses. We look at our community, and we know the weaknesses of this community. You know, we know the fact that Memphis is a place that is so wonderful and so perfect in so many ways, and yet we know the problems. And it's not just a problem of this community, it's a problem of every community. And I would say the biggest problem that we have, the biggest social problem that we have in our country today is indifference. We just don't care anymore, or we feel like we can't care anymore. And I, you know, when I look around at the real assault on human dignity that comes even from our own politicians, you know, I'm shocked that we have a hard time accepting the simple dignity of the human person. And I think that that's one of our problems of our communities is just indifference. But I think the biggest problem that we have, the biggest thing that we're dealing with right now is many of us have just lost confidence in ourselves. Our self-esteem has become very low. You know, where are the heroes in our world today? Where are those who are going to stand up for something and not just get completely inundated in this brawl, this mire, this muck that we keep finding ourselves struggling through? Where's our self-esteem that's able to stand up, and say, I stand for this and I don't care what the consequences are, I'm going to stand for this. And those things become real challenges for us. I always ask people, I always say to seminarians, one of the effects, I wouldn't say drawbacks, one of the effects of being the rector of a seminary is you cannot hear confessions. And there's a reason for that, and believe me, I'm perfectly knowledgeable about the reason and thankful for the reason. I don't want to know their confessions. But I think that there is something, I always say this, that there is something in confession that you want to say that never quite gets said. In other words, we go to confession and we tell our sins, but do we ever really get to the heart of the matter? Do we ever get to the heart of the matter? I think there is more impact in our lives for the things that we don't bring up than for the things that we do. And I always say, everybody has a secret sin that they can't talk to anybody about. And sometimes it's hurt from the past, and sometimes it's something you're very much engaged with in the present. But there's something that we can't talk to. You can't talk to your spouse. You can't talk to your children. You can't talk to your friends. You can't talk to your priest. There's something that we hold on. And Jesus, that's our weakness, right? That's our weakness. That's our vulnerability. But here's the thing. God doesn't care about those things. God wants us to let go of those parts of us that are so annoying to us. God, Christ, wants to pick us up from the ditch we have created for ourselves, because we're all the Jew in the ditch. And Christ, the one who was despised and rejected by men and women, has come to pick us up, and he's left us in the Katalima, the inn, and said, I'll take care of him. You take care of him. I'll give you money. He'll be back. He'll be back, right? We see all of that. Well, I always like to end the conferences with a little story, personal story. And you're thinking to yourself at this moment, I'll soon be out of here. I'll be able to stop at Kroger on the way home and get a bottle of cheap wine to drink to drown out the memory of that time I spent in church. You can always tell when I'm almost to the end, because I will say, now I have you a story I want to tell you. What you don't know is my stories last a long time. They're like 45-minute stories. It's tragic. But I have a story I want to tell you tonight, and it's usually, when I tell these, it's usually personal stories. And so because I only have so much of a font to draw from, sometimes I repeat myself. But did you know that that's a quality of people when they reach a certain age? Did you know that that's a quality of people when they reach a certain age, that they repeat themselves. Did you know that people repeat themselves when they get to be a certain age? Okay. What? No, not wearing the hearing aids. I'd like to tell the story about my parents. And some of you, very few of you, have had the privilege to meet my mother. Don't tell anything. My mother comes from a very staunch Southern Baptist background. She is a live wire. She still is. She's 80. She refuses to wear her hearing aids. We scream at each other. I was telling this story last night. This is my favorite mother story. So every time I go to visit her in Texas, she says, I would like to go to the Red Lobster. And I'm like, okay. So we go to the Red Lobster. She doesn't wear the hearing aids, so it's like a screaming thing back and forth, you know. We get to the Red Lobster, we sit down. It takes a long time to get in, a long time to get to the table. The menu opens, and this is what she said to me, and she says it almost every single year. She says, they only have seafood on this menu. And I'm like, it's called the Red Lobster. And that's what you have to do. You have to go like, it's called the Red Lobster. And then people start looking at you like you're elder abuse, you know. But they don't realize she won't wear the hearing aids because they think they make her look old. Red Lobster. But this eccentricity is not new. This eccentricity has been going along a long time. When I was a kid, my mother, 5'2", she was a Baptist woman, and she had an extra foot of hair. My father, so she's a live wire, Margaret. My father, Thomas, 6'7", and never said a word. It was like he never opened his mouth. She had a mouth. My father, no. They were wonderful. They were wonderful parents. You just had to figure out how the dynamic was going to flow on a particular day. So we had a very dynamic family life. I'm an only child. You probably know that or figured it out by now. My parents, they had certain eccentricities, especially my father. You know, and so eccentricities are easy to cultivate among men. Men have eccentricities, and the women are like, they sure do. Men have eccentricities. For example, men like to collect things, right? They love to collect things. They call it their collections. Most women refer to it as junk. They call it their collection, their treasures. And specific things that have no meaning at all. My father's first great collection that I recall was soda pop bottles. He collected antique soda pop bottles. And he would get these bottles in different places. He would go, like for example, to the flea market. Do you remember the flea market they used to have at the fairgrounds? And I'm told that they moved that flea market, but it was at the fairgrounds. And do you know that they had whole booths of men who sold soda pop bottles, which is crazy. You would buy the soda pop bottles, and they were like cola, sarsaparilla, orange, grape. What is sarsaparilla anyway? Nobody knows. Nobody cares. Root beer, tall, short, clear, green, orange, amber, didn't matter. He'd collect these bottles. He had a little catalog, a little file, one of those Rolodex, you know, they go, and you have little cards, and you put in there, soda pop bottle, found at the, blah, 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 at the flea market in Memphis at the fairgrounds, 1973. Then he would label the bottle. He would have a Dymo label maker. Do you remember the Dymo label maker? The women are like, do I remember it? It was one of those label makers that had this little ribbon, right? And so you made it by turning this handle, and then it would like A, S, O, D, A, space, P. You get the message, right? Then it gets to the end, and you pull it out, and you go, and then you have this long ribbon. And there's something demonic, because you never could get the back off. And then he would put it on the bottle, right? It's beautiful, beautiful. And he put these bottles on shelves all over the house. Bottles, bottles, bottles. Well, she had enough. She could only take so much. My mother's very ragged nerves, right? And so she would say, Thomas, come down here. Thomas, if you don't get rid of those bottles, I will divorce you. Constant threat hanging over the house. She would never do it, I don't think, but she threatened it. And he would always have the same response. He would say, Margaret, honey, now you calm down, sweetheart. These might be worth something someday. You see, men are always like, oh, there'll be some value to it. I'll keep it. I'll just keep it. How many men, I don't want a show of hands, in the room tonight have a garage full of crap because they think it's going to be valuable someday? And some of the women aren't far behind. He went on then to collect hammerheads. Not hammers, no handles, just the metal hammerhead. And it was every variety of hammerhead you can imagine, with one claw or two claws or little points, no points, very flat, all over the house on these felt-covered boards. They were all Rolodexed, and they were all Dymoed. And my mother had the same response. Thomas, if you don't get rid of these hammerheads, I will divorce you. And he had the same response. Calm down, sweetheart. You never know. They will be worth something someday. And then he went on. He went on to collect insulator caps. Does anybody know what an insulator cap is? This one man here does, because he has a huge collection at home. Insulator caps went on the tops of telephone poles. Why? I don't know. I mean, if you were intelligent enough to climb up on top of the pole, you were probably intelligent enough not to grab onto live electrical wires, or else that was your intention when you climbed up on top of the pole. But these insulator caps had the wire, that wrapped around. Remember, they used to have telephone poles above ground. We don't have that anymore, making the insulator cap all the more rare and valuable. And they're green, and they're white, and they're milky, and they're clear, and they're yellow. And they come tall and short. And if they have the little rubber seal inside, ooh, they're even more valuable. And my father collected, and again, you could go to that dang flea market and whole booths of insulator caps. It's crazy, because some woman had gotten tired of looking at those caps in her house and said, you go to that flea market and you sell all of them. But my mother just said, Thomas, if you don't get rid of these insulator caps, I will divorce you. And his response was, Margaret, sweetheart, honey, calm down. They may be worth something someday. Animals, deformed animals. You know, anybody watch the dodo? Does anybody know what the dodo is? Thank you. I'm addicted to the dodo. It's on the YouTube. Do you know, why do Southerners always put the definite article in front of everything? I'm going down to the Walmart. I'm going to the Wendy's. I watch the YouTube. And the dodo, which is all about deformed little animals. You know, the little donkey who thinks he's a dog. You know, the cat who has 3 legs and 1 bad eye with a patch. You know, and they're so heartwarming, and you feel, oh, life is good, in spite of the fact that my father loved those kind of deformed, this was way before the YouTube, loved those deformed animal stories, and he also loved deformed people. You know, not challenged, but people that were down and out. And this was one of the biggest problems of my childhood. And I feel like I might just need to talk to a therapist about, actually, I've been in therapy for like 30 years trying to figure out how to get over these parents. But here's the story. Every year, we lived in Washington, in the district, and every year we would drive in my father's Impala to Mississippi to visit my grandma. And it's a 14-hour drive, perhaps more if you followed one of my father's shortcuts. 2 or 3 days the trip could be extended. But of course, the cardinal rule in my father's world for travel was you don't stop. You don't stop. You might have to get gas, but remember, this is the 60s, right? And Impalas had like a 92-gallon tank, you know? And you don't stop. You don't stop for eating. You don't stop. Anyway, so you would have to take your stuff with you when you went. So you're ready for this 14-hour trip, no stopping. So you'd have to, and I'm the only child, and I'm the back seat, right? I'm the back seat. Get your stuff together, get ready for this trip. Coloring books and 64 Crayolas. Because you never seem to remember that you can't color in a moving car. You have to take some other reading material, and I don't even read well in a moving car. You take your pillow and blanket so you can have a little nap if you need one. And you will, because it's 14 hours. You take your drinks and snacks. You know, drinks are those little Cokes in the bottle size like this. Do they even make those? I guess they do now, because now nobody wants to drink anything because they make them fat. But then we didn't care. We just wanted little drinks because they were so cute. Your snacks, like the big double-sized box of cupcakes and ho-hos. And your mother always got you Twinkies because she never remembered you hated Twinkies. And the mason jar. Which you needed because you drank all those little Cokes and there's no stopping. And the mother's cardinal rule is you never hang anything out the window. So here I am in the back with my snacks and my drinks and my pillow and my blanket and my coloring book and my games and my jar. And off we go to Grandma's. And nothing can make my father stop. Nothing except a hitchhiker. I mean, this is the 60s, right? Today, you pick up a hitchhiker, you end up on, one of those unsolved mysteries things. Not in those days. You could pick up a hitchhiker, no problem. But I didn't like hitchhikers. I was 6 years old. I didn't like hitchhikers. I didn't care for them. I found them highly problematic. Why? Because my father picked them up and made them sit in the back seat with me. So I could see this hitchhiker about 14 miles in the distance. I had an eye for the thing. And I would think to myself, oh God, a hitchhiker. Oh, let me try to distract him. And so I'd say, Daddy, look at that cow. He's got 3 legs over there. Look at it. Is that a soda pop bottle on the side of the road? Or, could pull over, go the other way. But he always could say, it's like he had this homing thing. It's, oh, look, there's a hitchhiker. I'm going to pull over. And I'm like, oh, God. Oh, this is bad. We're only 2 hours into this trip. And I knew exactly how the little dialogue was getting ready to go because the man would come in front of the car. He'd come around to my father's side. My daddy would roll down the window because remember when you had to roll down the window? That was a long time ago. I never did learn how to do that. I've been driving for 40 years. And I still can't roll down a window and drive at the same time as the car goes like this. Anyway, it doesn't matter. He comes over. My daddy rolls down the window. We're stopped there on the side of the road. And he says, hey, buddy, what's up? Their name was always Buddy in his mind. Hey, buddy, what's up? Well, I'm trying to get somewhere. And my father would say, where are you trying to go? And then the guy, it was always the same dialogue, and my father never picked up on this. I'm in the back seat, by the way. That's why I'm sitting down. And the guy would be like, well, where are you going to go? We're going to see Grandma in Mississippi. Well, that's where I'm going. Why did his mother always live near my grandmother? 12 hours in the car, because this was then the thing my father said, the ugliest words in the English language, 4 words, the ugliest words in the English language, get in the back. He opens the back door, he gets down, sits right next to me, and the first thing, what does he do? The first thing that he does is start eyeing my jar. I'm like, Then he looks at my little thermos thing with the Cokes in it, and I'm like, And he's like, the snacks, I mean, you can have the Twinkies if you want them, but no. 12 hours, we pull off, we start out towards Grandma's, and I could see the front seat having their non-dialogue. Because, Southerners have a way of saying something when they're saying nothing, or they have a way, and we were talking about this the other day. Do you know the most volatile expression in the Southern language? Well, bless your heart, which basically means go jump off a cliff. Bless your heart. Oh, if you hear bless your heart, you're done. They didn't say anything. That's the second most important Southern language, no talk. But I could see my mother's hair above the seat. It was kind of just shaking a little. And I know what she was thinking. She was thinking, oh, Thomas, if you don't get rid of this hitchhiker, I am going to divorce you. And my father never got the opportunity to say it. But if he had, he would have replied, calm down, Margaret, honey. You never know. He might be worth something someday. God has the practiced eye of a junk collector. And he looks down into the ditch of human life and says, oh, I think they're all going to be worth something someday. I always say God has no taste at all, and that's undoubtedly a good thing. There's a message so strong, I think even in my father's simple way, Dear God, are you there? There's a message so strong, and it's this: I am here. You may need to adjust your glasses a little or your hearing aids. I am here, and I love you. That's the message the world is desperate to hear. And that's the message that we have the responsibility to take to that world. The Lord be with you. May Almighty God bless you, the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Well, now get out.